to both of those, and I'll go to our website if you want to find out more information. And so introducing today's speaker, it's a great pleasure to welcome Seirian Sumner, who's a professor at University College London. And she's a behavioral ecologist. A lot of her work has focused on how sociality evolves or breaks down in multiple organisms. But I was just talking to her earlier, but inevitably she's been drawn more and more to wasps as an ideal model organism, but also as a particularly fascinating set of organisms that have very bad PR. And so it seems like she's embarked on a crusade to rehabilitate the wasp in both here and around the world. And she has a book which I've just started reading, but comes highly recommended, Endless Forms on Why We Should Love Wasps. And there is afterwards, there is a book sale and signing around the corner as well. So if you want your own autographed version, you can get it after this event, and we'll have drinks and informal conversation there as well. And so over to you. Thank you for joining us.
The lights down slightly for the visuals. Oops, maybe not quite that far. I mean, I'm fine with it, but okay, that's great. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you guys about wasps. I've kind of tried to repitch this to be to fit the kind of the theme of the Leverhulme Centre for Nature Recovery. So apologies if I mispitched it, and I'd like your feedback, because this is the first time I've called this talk. I've actually rebatched this talk as the natural capital of wasps, but I think one of the reasons why I've done that is because I think trying to get a broader vision on putting a much maligned, much unliked and overlooked organism into the spotlight as to why it matters for us and for the planet and for nature recovery. Do I have to point out the thing? No? What am I doing wrong? There we go. Okay, so we are living in unprecedented times. I don't need to tell this audience this, but with climate change, biodiversity loss, degradation of habitats around the world, we are facing moments where this planet is pushed to the limits in terms of its stability and survival. And so we need a change. We need transformative change in our relationship with nature and how we value it and how we look after it and give space to nature for recovery. But how do we do this when already 50% of us live in urban environments like this? And by 2050, 70% of us will be living like this. And in doing this, we become much less connected to nature. If we don't see nature around us and the concrete jungle becomes our habitat, how are we going to learn to fall back in love with nature, and particularly the parts of nature that we already struggle to like? One of the things that has caught my attention quite recently, and I feel quite passionate about, is this kind of extinction of experience, and particularly amongst the young people who are the children, who are the next generation of the people who are going to have to put up with this planet and help recover it. Really concerning data show that children no longer have connection with nature. Can't actually get this working now. Am I pressing the same thing? Yeah, right, okay. Don't worry, I won't do that. Children no longer experience nature. We don't let them go out climbing trees and fishing and catching insects and bird watching. There's a decline just in the last sort of 30 years, really, in 20, 30 years, in how our young people interact with nature. And actually, children can't, in the UK, struggle to identify really common species like robins and stinging nettles and bumblebees. So there's an enormous problem that faces us in this challenge of how we're going to repair our relationship with nature such that we can give it space to recover. I really like this quote from Baba Diom at the IUCN meeting in 1968. "We will conserve only what we love, we will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught." So we have to repair our relationship with nature such that we do love it, such that we have that curiosity in what we see around us, such that we want to understand the role of that particular organism in an ecosystem. And we will only be able to do that if we're taught, if we can learn about these organisms. Now, as a professor at UCL, one of my jobs, of course, I do research, but another part of my job, of course, is teaching the next generation, the undergraduates and the PhD students. And my role, I feel a real responsibility to help them reconnect with nature and to help them understand that all facets of nature are important, and particularly so for them, for the future, for their futures. And this is a real problem for me because I study the least loved organism possibly on the planet, the wasp. So I've got an uphill battle here. And I know that I've got an uphill battle because if you Google wasps, you come up with images like this. They are depicted as the gangsters of the insect world, and they inspire some of the horrific popular culture. In this film here, I think it's called Dragon Wasps, where these enormous wasps will fire from their abdomens and kill people. And wasps are always depicted as the evil, the villain in popular culture. And this fear and this hatred of wasps is nothing new. It's not popular culture that has driven our sort of negative relationship with wasps. In fact, if you look back to some of the oldest texts, in fact, the first published entomologist, Aristotle, he wrote about wasps. And actually what he wrote about wasps was remarkably accurate. And what's really troubling is that the information he had about wasps, we haven't really progressed much in the last 2,000 years. And so I found that quite striking, that although Aristotle wrote very accurately about describing wasp colonies, he still said this of wasps, that hornets and wasps are devoid of the extraordinary features that characterize bees. They have nothing divine about them, as the bees have. And this comparison with bees is something that I come up against all the time. I've been studying wasps for over 25 years. And if I had £1 for every time somebody had said to me, why don't you study bees instead? I would be very rich and retiring. Because people do not understand, they don't get it. There's like, why would you study wasps? And I blame Aristotle. I mean, he started it all. And you can pick any religious text and you will undoubtedly find that that deity will send wasps to punish the unbelievers. So there's at least 3 books in the Bible where hornets are sent to punish the unbelievers. So our hatred of wasps is really deeply ingrained in culture. Now, a few years ago, I got a bit fed up with people telling me that they didn't like wasps. And I thought, well, maybe this is just anecdotes. Let's get some data to see if the public really do hate wasps. So we put out an online survey and we asked people to give us words that spring to mind when they think about wasps. So what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think about wasps? Yes, sting. Somebody said it before it even appeared. Sting is pretty much the larger the word indicates the more people who use the words, the size of the word. And pretty much the only word that people have to describe wasps is that they sting. Now, I'd like to remind you that bees also sting. I'm sure you all know this. But when we ask the same questions to the public about bees, we get a very different picture. There is sting in that figure somewhere, but it's quite hard to find. Honey, pollination, flowers, pollen, buzz, beautiful, endangered, all of these positive, emotive words which show that we care about bees, we love the bees, and also that we understand their utility in providing us with honey and providing us with their pollination services. People understand what bees do. People don't understand what wasps do. They have nothing to say about their utility here. This is a sample of over 750 people. So what on earth are we going to do when we look back to Baba Diem's quote? We will conserve only what we love. We don't love wasps. Nobody loves wasps except me, and maybe a few in the audience. We will only love what we understand. There's so little research on wasps. If you look at the research on wasps compared to bees, particularly on their ecosystem services, you'll find for every paper on wasps, there's at least 40 papers on bees. And that's despite the fact there are at least 5 times as many species of wasps as there are of bees. And we will only understand what we are taught. So how can we learn more about wasps? If we don't love them, we don't understand them, we can only focus on this part of trying to understand what we are taught. Now, actually, the wasps have a lot to teach us. This is one of many phylogenies from, not from my work, but from a paper in 2017. Everybody has a favorite phylogeny, don't you? You have a favorite phylogeny? Some nodding here. This is my favorite phylogeny. And the reason why it's my favorite phylogeny is because it shows how enormously diverse wasps are and how they dominate all of the Hymenoptera. So the Hymenoptera, the bees, wasps, and the ants. But actually, if you look at this phylogeny of the Hymenoptera, you'll see that they're all wasps. I mean, all 200,000 species of them. The bottom here, we've got the we've got the sawflies. Is this going to work? Yeah, here we go. Can you see my cursor? Yeah, we've got the sawflies, which actually are vegetarian wasps. They don't actually predate at all. And then we've got all of the parasitoid wasps here. Now, parasitoids, like this insect here, are not stinging wasps. They have an ovipositor rather than the sting, but they will lay their eggs on prey. So they evolve the wasp waste, and they evolve the ability to lay it for their offspring, for their young, to feed on prey. And that was a pivotal moment in evolution, and it resulted in this huge speciation event. You can see in this figure where the wasp waste emerged and this parasitoidism, this ability for offspring, for young to feed off prey, evolved. And the parasitoids actually represent over 70% of described wasps. There are over 100,000 species of described wasps. 70% of them are parasitoids. But actually, scientists think that there are 5 to 10 times more species to be discovered. And most of that diversity is thought to be within these parasitoid wasps because they're very understudied and they tend to be very small and hard to find. And then at some point in evolution, the sting evolved, and we had the aculeates, which includes all of the bees, all of the wasps, and all of the ants. Because if you look very carefully in the rest of this phylogeny, you have to squint, but somewhere in there you will find the ants. Here we go, Formicicoidea. The ants are just wasps that have forgotten how to fly, apart from the sexuals. They are literally flightless wasps. And then in the same way, you've got the bees at the top here. The bees evolved from wasps. If we hadn't had wasps, we wouldn't have had bees. Bees are just wasps that have forgotten how to hunt. They're vegetarian wasps. So everything is a wasp. Everything that you care about with bees and ants, they're all just modified wasps. Wasps offer us this enormous diversity. They're endless in their forms and their functions. And so it's hard to understand why we don't love them, why haven't we had the same level of curiosity in trying to understand wasps and their life histories and what they do in the environment that we've had, that the energy that we've put into asking the same questions of bees and also of ants. Now, my journey into wasps was actually a completely accidental one. I was interested in the origins of sociality and why any individual would give up the chance to reproduce and the evolution of altruism. And so I started studying very simple societies of wasps, like these facultatively cooperative breeders. You can think of them as being a little bit like a meerkat society or a cooperatively breeding bird society. All the individuals in these societies have the potential to be reproductive, but instead they choose to stay at home and help raise relatives to pass on their genes. I got interested in wasps not because they were wasps, but because of the questions that they allowed us to address, the big scientific questions. But then once I'd stepped into the world of wasps, and I do recommend starting with a very easy gateway wasp, which doesn't sting much, which was my gateway to wasps, you realise that the diversity of wasps, most people think of wasps as these vespines on the right-hand side here with the word superorganism under them. That is a queen wasp with a worker wasp beside her. Those are the picnic bothering wasps that come to your picnics in the summer, the vespulas. This is what you probably think of as a wasp. And yet there's only about 50 species of those vespines. And the rest of the diversity of these social wasps is over another 1,000 species, actually probably 1,200 species, of these different wasps that display different levels of social complexity. And so most of my research over the last 25 years, in fact, until very recently, has been looking at the evolution of sociality, understanding their behaviors, looking at their gene expression, and seeing how that can tell us about their behaviors and how they respond to the changing environments within the colony and within the social structures. And then more on a macroevolutionary level, looking at how these different levels of social complexity have evolved, and the role of plasticity in losing plasticity at the individual level as they become committed to queen and worker caste versus gaining plasticity at the colony level. Now that's a whole other talk, and that's the usual research talk I would give, but it's not appropriate for this audience or for the Leverhulme Centre for Nature Recovery. I've spent the last years traveling the world. The wasps have taken me to the most fabulous places. Unfortunately, wasps like to nest in the most horrible places, like abandoned toilets and old shootout areas in parts of the world that are probably too dangerous to go to, but the wasps will always move in where humans leave their mess behind. And actually, this picture here of me in a tunnel, I'm crouched inside a drainage ditch, a culvert in the rainforest of Malaysia. Above my head, that's where I started my PhD work on wasps. Above my head are lots of little brown sticks. Each one is a wasp nest. If you look very carefully, you'll see some very dark blobs on those sticks. Those are all wasps. So above my head, I'm crouched in a contained space, and above my head are literally hundreds of wasp nests and thousands of wasps. Now, for most people, that would be your idea of hell. But for me, that's my heaven. I love it. Lots of sample sizes, great for doing studies. And then the wasps around the world are endless in their forms. Every time, even this year, I've been to places that I'd never been to before, and I've seen these amazing wasps in India and I haven't got Ghana on there, but there are wasps everywhere I go. I discover that there's a whole new world of wasps that I never knew about, and I've been studying wasps for 25 years. So the reason I've studied these wasps is for their sociality, and I've been banging on about this. I love telling people about why they should love wasps. I even would go to great efforts. I will dress up as a wasp if you asked me to. Didn't ask me to today, Yurinda, but you know, the option was always there. I was waiting for the call. I'll do stuff with kids because kids are the generation that we can change their perceptions of wasps. I got so cross a few years ago. My daughter, who was quite young at the time, came home from school with a little reading comprehension, and it said, "I hate wasps, blank, they sting." That came home from her primary school for her homework. I was horrified. We indoctrinate our children to fear the parts of nature that us old people fear because we grew up in that same culture. At the same time, she didn't come home with this, but she would have been taught at school how important bees are and not to fear bees, despite the fact they also sting. That angers me somewhat. I can tell you more over a glass of wine. Anyway, needless to say, I have gone out of my comfort zone to change people's perceptions of wasps. And most recently, I've written a book in an effort to reach a wider audience. But one thing I realized by giving lots of popular science talks is that people don't care about the evolution of sociality. People don't care about major transitions in evolution. People don't care about differential gene expression in the brains of wasps. They think I'm a bit mad. What people do care about is this question: what's the point of wasps? The number of popular talks I've given, popular science talks, to ranges of different people, where I can see them sort of nodding politely as I talk about sociality. They're trying to keep awake. And then I would pitch in at the end with just, oh, and wasps are kind of useful because they're predators, so they might be really useful for biocontrol. Suddenly the room will wake up. I can see the whole room change. The minute you tell people why something in nature matters to them and has a value, a utility to them, it changes their perceptions. They wake up. We're terribly selfish. We only think about ourselves. So this question, in fact, it was by talking to the public and getting their responses like this that has led my research away from sociality. We still study sociality in my lab, but also we have a newer strand over the last 5 years or so on the utility of wasps, and particularly addressing this point of what's the point? What's the point of wasps to you, to people, and to the planet? And of course, the obvious framework is the ecosystem services framework, which you'll all be very familiar with. What is the role of these insects in terms of their provisioning services, their supporting services, their cultural services, and their regulating services? We wrote a review about this because no one had ever written a review about the ecosystem services of wasps. And it was remarkable. It was an eye-opener to us when we wrote that review of how much information there is out there if you dig into it to try and get to these, bring the story together about actually these insects really matter. They're apex predators, they're pollinators, they're decomposers. But moving on from this ecosystem services framework, which is very much about the flow of services to us, what can we get from them? These new concepts, which you'll all be much more familiar with than me, the natural capital, the stock of this asset that wasps offer us. What is their stock? We don't have any monetary value to put on the services of wasps. We do for bees. We know how much bees matter for pollination, but we don't know how much wasps matter for any of the many things that I'm going to tell you about in what they do in the environment. We don't have any monetary values. On top of that is another layer, which is this concept of people's contributions to nature. And this brings in the cultural perspective, the way that we, perhaps in the West, have a very utilitarian way of measuring the value of nature. In other parts of the world, communities that live in a much more connected way to nature still, they have different relationships with nature, and that should be valued too. And that includes both the good interactions and the bad interactions, nature in the round. So I think these layers of ecosystem services, natural capital, people's contributions to nature, I'm sure that all of you have a favorite term. Maybe there's others that I don't know about, but I don't think it matters. The point is that we're bringing it all in together to try and work out how we can use these frameworks to ask the right questions about what the point of wasps is. So I'm going to now take you through some of the reasons why I think you should care about wasps and why I think there should be a lot more research on wasps in these areas. Wasps as regulators. Wasps are apex predators. They hunt prey, they hunt arthropod prey. In social wasps, they will kill the prey, bring it back to the nest, feed it to the larvae. If you had a social wasp nest in your garden this year, then probably it was eating the aphids and caterpillars on your crops, on your vegetables in your garden. They're doing you that service. Now, despite the fact that you can look in the literature and you can see that people know that wasps hunt. People know that wasps hunt, have known that wasps hunt insects. Observations are in the literature going back hundreds of years. And yet, bizarrely, there's no research on it, hardly any research at all. The solitary wasps hunt in a very different kind of way. This is a jewel wasp. She lives alone. She doesn't live in a society. She lives alone. She hunts cockroaches. And she's done a remarkable thing to this cockroach. She's stung it in the thorax to stop it running away. And then she's also stung it in the head, in the brain, injecting a neurotoxin, which renders the cockroach free of free will, but still able to move. And so now what she's doing is she's leading that cockroach to its underground tomb, to a hole in the ground that she's dug. She's going to put that cockroach in the ground in a paralyzed state. It won't try and escape. She will lay an egg on it. And that egg will hatch into a larva, and the larva will feast on that paralyzed, perfectly preserved cockroach until it's fully developed and it will pupate. This is what solitary wasps do. This is also one of my favorite wasps. This is Pepsis pluta. She's a beautiful pompilid spider hunting wasp. That's my hand. We caught her in the Amazon rainforest near Manaus a few years ago, and actually we've sequenced her genome now. We're very excited. But you can see that the spider that she's on, I think it's a tarantula, that's not dead, that's paralyzed. So she uses her venom to paralyze it, and if we hadn't caught her, she would have buried it in the ground and laid an egg on it, sealed it up, and then that would have provided her offspring with everything it needs. So the strategies of how wasps hunt are really endless and so poorly studied. Of the few that have been studied, there are remarkable stories on how they do it. So as part of this review, we went into the literature to work out exactly what wasps hunt, to understand what their role is in regulating all of these other arthropods in the ecosystem. On the left-hand side, on the red boxes, those are the different families of solitary wasps. And the lines connect them to the blue bars, which are the prey that they are recorded as predating on in the literature. This is just, we had a fabulous time going back in sort of out of print books, and the natural historians of the past, they actually observed these things and they wrote them down. An observation of what a particular wasp has hunted is not publishable these days, but it was in the 1800s and the early 1900s. I think that's an error that we don't publish that kind of thing anymore. Because based on those data, based on that literature, we were able to get an overview of what these wasps eat. And what's overwhelming here is that most families of wasps, solitary wasps, will specialize in a particular order of insect or arthropod. So for example, the pompilid wasps, of which you can see one of here, if I can get my cursor to work, pompilid wasps are the spider hunters. And lo and behold, all of the records, the bar width indicates the number of records, they all hunt the spiders. The exception is the Crabronidae, which are actually a hugely diverse group, and they hunt a much wider diversity of prey. But if you drill down into finer levels of taxonomic level within that Crabronidae, you will find that they are also more specialized. And the fact that the solitary wasps are specialized makes sense, because they have to paralyze that prey. They have to have a venom that is likely to be so bespoke to that particular organism, that prey item. So the venom that you need to suppress the immune system of a spider and to paralyze it perfectly but not kill it, and such that it's preserved for several weeks whilst the baby wasp eats it from the inside out, it's a very specific type of venom. You need a very specific venom, a different venom, if you do the same thing for a caterpillar. So it's no surprise that there's been selection for a very specific prey type, for these types of wasps that rely on this paralyzation of the prey. What about the social wasps? We did the same thing for the social wasps. So there's 3 subfamilies of social wasps. The Vespinae, the ones that you know, they're the hornets and the yellow jackets that bother you at picnics. The Stenogastronii, those cute hover wasps that I started my fieldwork on as a PhD student with the big thousands of wasps above my head. And the Polistinae, the paper wasps, which you find all over the world. And invariably, these social wasps show a very different pattern to the solitary wasps. They tend to be generalists. They will hunt anything. And actually that makes sense because they kill prey. They don't need to paralyze it. They don't need to preserve it. They just find it, kill it, chop it up, chew it up, and feed it to the larvae. They don't need to do anything special. In fact, they rarely use their stings to kill these prey. So they have a very different kind of hunting strategy. But the fact that these wasps, these social wasps, hunt such a wide diversity of prey could actually be really important. You probably have one of these nests in your garden or your loft or your shed, at least maybe not this year, but in previous years. This is the common yellow jacket wasp. This is my village near Didcot, where we found this lovely wasp nest. This is Vespula vulgaris. You'll see the queen at the top if you look very carefully. Prizes for those who spot her. So she's one queen, the rest of them are workers, just like a honeybee colony. A colony of that size can have 10,000 workers who are all foraging in the areas around them within about 1 kilometre. What are they eating? They're eating a huge diversity of prey. In order to work this out, we took the larvae out of the nests and across nests from the south of England. And the wonderful thing about a holometabolous insect is that the larva contains everything that it's been fed in its life. And so until it pupates, and then it will excrete it all. So by taking the larvae out of the nest and then slipping the gut out of the larva, comes out like a sock. And then you can extract out all the gut contents, which is the decomposing prey that it's been fed, and you can sequence it. It's just a little bit better than ancient DNA. And so by doing this on colonies across southern England, we were able to see the true diversity of the prey that these wasps, these common picnic bothering wasps that you probably hate, which is fine for now, but half an hour's time you're not allowed to hate them. But as you can see from this figure, it shows that I don't know how good your entomology is. Most of what they eat is Hymenopterous, that's bees, wasps, and ants. They also eat Diptera, which are the flies, and the Hemiptera, which is the bugs, and the Lepidoptera, which is the butterflies and moths, the Orthoptera, which is the jumpy things, grasshoppers, the Araneae, which are the spiders, and the Coleoptera, which are the beetles, and so on. You can see that they eat a huge diversity of prey. Now, we were also curious to know if what they eat is actually simply representative of what's available in the environment. So using standard insect sampling methods like malaise traps and sweep nets and pan traps, we sampled what we thought were the organisms in that environment. And so these are on your left, field sampling. That's what we found in the field sampling. It's a percentage of arthropods represented by those different orders. And you can see that the gut sampling kind of is a little bit different. Some of them look almost the same. But actually what this tells us is that the wasps are probably not sampling the environment in the same way that our sampling was. So they appear to be much better at finding Orthoptera, for example, than we were. So comparisons of what's in the environment and what's available, and seeing how comparing that with what they actually eat is a really difficult job, because we can never sample the environment in the same way that a wasp does. But what we can take home from this is that wasps are eclectic in their choice of what they eat. They will eat pretty much any arthropod that is around. What was also really interesting is that we were able to show that actually what they eat varies by location. Maybe that's no surprise. What they eat in a London park is very different to what they eat around a National Trust property in Devon. But actually, more surprisingly, was that even colonies within the same sites differed significantly in the diets that they had in the larvae. And we sequenced a large number of larvae, like 80 larvae per nest. So that was really surprising to us. And actually, sometimes the nests were really close by. And that tells us that actually there is a very colony level specificity about how they're sampling prey and what they're collecting. And we don't know what determines that. That's future research to find out. It might be that the stage of the colony was very different. It might be that some of the workers have become quite fixated on a particular type of prey. And so it's a behavioural process of which there is some suggestion of in the literature, and I'll be coming back to that a little bit later on. Now, I've talked a lot about how useful these insects are and how important they might be in regulating the populations, but actually it's important to recognise that there is an ugly side to these vespine wasps as well as invaders. This is not my work. This is work from Phil Lester's lab in New Zealand, but from an economic perspective, these same wasps that I've just been praising for being these important regulators of populations of insects, when they're out of their native zone, they can have devastating effects on the ecosystem. They cause a dysregulation and an enormous economic cost to the economy. Okay, realise I'm going very slowly. Okay, I'm going to move on to wasps as biocontrol. The wasps that are well renowned for biocontrol are, of course, the parasitoids. This is a huge maize field in Brazil, and where it's a monoculture. They have big pest problems unless they use GM crops or pesticides. GM crops and pesticides are now less effective as the pests evolve resistance. And so in Brazil, they have big factories that farm parasitoids, which they will then release into the fields, but using drones. So that these factories are incredible, and it's a booming industry just in the last 2 or 3 years. Parasitoid wasps are well renowned for this utility. That's nothing new. You can buy your own parasitoid wasps, do your own biocontrol for those clothes moths that you know are in your cupboards. Go online, you can buy your own parasitoids and have them in your bedroom. But the idea that social wasps could be useful as biocontrol is practically unstudied. And yet, they've got all the hallmarks that mean they must be useful, they must be effective. They have large colony sizes. A single colony can have thousands of workers that are going out and eating prey, bringing back prey. They're generalists, these Vespula, they're generalist hunters. It doesn't matter what kind of pests you have, it's probably going to hunt it if it's very abundant. They're central place foragers, which means that they've got a nest, and you know that they're only going to go a certain distance from that nest. They eat caterpillars and flies, we know this, and these are some of the orders that are the most important for crop pests. And we also know that they might fixate on particularly good prey. So potentially you could use that trait in order to train your wasps to deplete the pest populations that you specifically have in your field. This sounds great, and yet no one's doing it. And I find this even more perturbing when I read in this book of over 150 years ago by Edward Ormer. It's a fantastic read, by the way, British Social Wasp, out of print, but you can get hold of it. He says that the practical result of destroying all of the wasps on Sir Brisbane's estate was that in 2 years' time, the place was infested, like Egypt, with a plague of flies. That means that if you take wasps out of the ecosystem, you take that top predator out of the ecosystem, those other populations of insects go unregulated. I think this is probably the first experimental evidence that wasps have a real impact on the ecosystem. So we did some research a few years ago in Brazil to see if wasps could be actually effective in reducing the populations of pests. So this was work done in São Paulo State in Ribeirão with Professor Odair Fernandes and Fabio Nascimento. And the postdoc doing the work was Robin Southern. And what Robin did is he put these colonies of wasps inside a screen house. There's beautifully named Polistes Satan. I mean, that says it all. And he would give them maize plants and sugarcane plants, which were infected with the main crop pests, which are the sugarcane borer and the fall armyworm. And then he looked to see whether they could access the prey and also how effective they were in reducing the populations by excluding the wasps from some infected plants and allowing them access to others. What we thought we wouldn't find is that the prey that had burrowed into, like the sugarcane borer will bore into the plant, that the wasps wouldn't be able to get those out. But actually Robin's work showed that they could. They would dig, this shows a picture here of this wasp digging inside the plant to pull out the prey. So they were effective. They could reach the prey. But also they were effective in reducing the levels of prey, the size of the prey, they would reduce the number of prey, and they would also result in less plant damage to that plant from that prey type. So this is experimental evidence that these wasps can indeed be effective in pest control. Another sign that they can be helpful and useful as pest control is some work that we've also done in Nigeria with Ikeona and also my PhD student, Romerod, who's from Cameroon. And we did a similar thing as we did with the Vespula guts, we're okay, aren't we? Yeah. Where we sequence the guts of the different nests. Now, this is a species called Rhopalidia gutterpennis. Here it has open nests. You find them everywhere. They're on the houses, they're on the farm buildings, they're on the trees, they're common as muck. They are literally everywhere. People don't like them, they knock them down because they're wasps. But when we sequenced the guts, we found again, a huge diversity of prey, but a predominance of lepidopterans. I don't know where that's gone. Oops, sorry. That big yellow circle there should say lepidopterans. And if we delve into those Lepidoptera, we find that there's 138 genera, and it includes 18 families. And within those species, so of the 119 species, we were able to identify 23 pest species. So these wasps are eating the pest in the crop fields. But what was especially interesting is that IK, who collected the samples in Nigeria, he told us that he collected them from trees in fields of very mixed farming, and the farmers weren't using any pesticides because they didn't need to. They said there were no pests. And yet we know from the guts of the wasps that live in the fields that there are pests there. So what this suggests is that these wasps are actually unmanaged natural enemies. They're doing the job of regulating those pest populations in these fields. They're doing the services without the people even knowing. So I think this is a really exciting area, and we're doing a similar project now in Cameroon with these beautiful Bologna wasps, and sequencing the guts across different farming communities and seeing whether they are actually, in order to generate the evidence to persuade the farmers that they should consider using wasps as biocontrol agents. And I think social wasps are a really promising, sustainable biocontrol agent, and that their potential is especially strong in subtropical and tropical regions, particularly in lower and middle income countries, which perhaps don't have many more subsistence farmers who rely entirely on the crops that they grow in their fields. And if the crops fail due to a pest, they go hungry. But also the diversity of wasps is incredibly high in these parts of the world. And the wasp nests are everywhere, particularly in farming communities. You will find them on the houses, on the buildings. The wasps are always there. So they are waiting to be harnessed. It just takes a little bit of understanding of how to work with them safely in order that we can help those farmers harness the power of their natural native pest controllers. Okay, so pest control by wasps and their role as regulators is no surprise to most people. Perhaps that wasps are pollinators could be more of a surprise. There is very little data, needless to say. There's very little data on the pollinator potential of hunting wasps. This is a common yellow jacket wasp in my garden on some ivy. They're a really common pollinator of ivy. You'll find them on ivy in the autumn. So to understand what the role of wasps might be as pollinators, we can ask, well, can we identify specialists, species that only are recorded visiting particular plants? And can we find some species that are also generalists, that are visiting a large diversity of plants? And the specialists are likely to be the effective pollinators, but it also makes them quite vulnerable, whatever plants are dependent on them, because if you lose the wasps, the pollinators, then you will also lose the plants. Generalists, on the other hand, you might think, well, they're not as effective as pollinators. There's less chance that they're transporting pollen from between individuals of the same species of plant. But scientists think that they possibly are good backup pollinators in degraded and stressed habitats, which pollinators that are more specialized, like bees, might not be able to survive. So in the same review as the wasp hunting data, we also looked at which wasps were found on which plants. I apologize for the colors. My colleague was colorblind, and I should have stopped him making this horrible color. But basically, the ones in white are the wasps, and the ones in the greens are the and blues are the plant families. And you can see that the Vespidae, which includes all of the most of the social wasps, and a lot of the solitaries, they visit a huge diversity of different plants. Now, that's as far as we got in that paper. But since then, we've dug into these data a little bit more. And this is unpublished work conducted by a master's student, Enzo Sanchez. Enzo basically doubled the data set of occurrences of wasps on flowers. Now, I'm not going to pretend that the evidence of a wasp on a flower is evidence that they're pollinating, but it's the best we can do in the absence of any experimental data. So he was able to double the sample size, to include over 800 species of wasps that visit over 1,500 species of plants. But actually the coverage was extremely poor, representing less than 15% of these aculeate wasps. These aren't the parasitoids. But the Vespidae, which includes all of the yellow jackets and the hornets, was represented 62% of the records. And then bizarrely, there's Mutilidae, which are these velvet ants, which actually look a bit like ants, but they're actually wasps. They've got no wings. There was a study out just last year that had a big data set, so we're able to include that in this as well. And we pieced together, using bipartite networks, to look at the general patterns of these different wasp families and the types of flowers and plants families that they visit. This looks like a mess, okay? It is a mess, but let's delve into it a little bit. So by using this measure of specificity, which takes into account the phylogeny, phylogenetic relationships of plants, we're able to put the wasps into categories of more specialists. And these are ones with this phylogenetic species variability score around 0, and generalists. So what this means is that you could have a wasp that visits 5 species of plants, and actually it could still have quite a specialist score if those 5 species were all from the same family or subfamily. Whereas you could have a wasp that visits 5 species of plants that are completely divergent across the phylogeny, and they might have a very high score. So that's what that means. So filtering for the data which didn't have enough records, we're able to use these data to try and delve into identifying potential specialists and generalists within the wasps. I'm going to start with the obvious. Well, actually, they're obvious to any entomologists in the room. The pollen wasps. There is actually a group of wasps that don't hunt prey, but they actually collect pollen, and their brood have evolved the ability to feed off pollen. They're called the pollen wasps, the Masarinae. They're actually very widespread around the world, but I think about 99% of the research on them is all done in South Africa by this husband and wife team. So our data is very limited to one specific area of the world. But nonetheless, we were able to see that the Masarinae also include what we expected, which was specialists. So with this very low score of PSV scores, so these are species that only visit one type of flower. So they're specialist wasps that pollinate particular flowers. But there are also a bunch of generalists. There are pollen wasps that visit a huge diversity of flowers. So that suggests that even these generalists, there must be selection for them to be generalists, and they're still probably being very effective at pollinating. And also they have these morphological adaptations, the same things that we see in bees. We see these same kind of morphological adaptations on them that make them better at collecting pollen in the same way that bees do. More surprising was that these other wasps, so the Specidae, these are some of my favorite wasps. They're solitary wasps. They're very beautiful, have these long petioles, these very long wasp waists. And surprisingly, we found a number of species that are specialists that appear to be only visiting one flower. So that suggests that they are potential candidates for future study on their role as being important pollinators of particular flowers. But there's also generalists, and I think this one in particular is really interesting, this Scelephron species, because it's actually been it comes from the Americas, but it's been a very successful invader across the world. So it's very, very good at invading new habitats, and potentially that might be because it's such a generalist visitor of these flowers. The Polistinae are really interesting. So these are the social wasps. They're all social, and they have the largest group of generalists. So they pretty much visit any kind of flower. And what was really interesting is there is actually the 2 studies that are most compelling. If you need persuading that wasps can pollinate, the Polistes wasps are the place that you should go, because there are 2 studies that show that they are effective as bees in transferring pollen. And one of the reasons why they're so good at this is because they actually, parts of their anatomy are really good at collecting pollen in the same way as bees do. They haven't got pollen baskets like bees, but they have lots of they're quite hairy wasps. If you look at them under the microscope, they're surprisingly hairy, and the pollen can stick to those hairs. But then we come back to our much maligned yellow jackets and hornets, the wasps that everyone hates. Should we be valuing them as pollinators? Well, actually, I think we should be. Many of them are generalists, but some of research has shown that they are also very effective at pollinating ivy. So most of them are generalists. There's the odd example where they are complete specialists. And this is really fascinating. It's a species of orchid that gives off an odor that mimics the smell of a honeybee in distress. And there's nothing more exciting and alluring to a hunting wasp than the sign of a distressed odor from an insect that they know they can kill and feed to their brood. And that's what this wasp is doing here. And the traits that make these vespines potentially really useful as pollinators is that they are remarkably hairy, they have electrostatic properties, and that their short tongues means that they can access quite a large number of different types of plants. So there is plenty of evidence out there that wasps visit flowers, and some of them only visit specific flowers, suggesting that they might be specialist pollinators. But a lot of them visit a diversity of flowers, and they deserve attention as well. So I think the future of wasp pollination research is really exciting. And we've identified some promising groups, but we do need more experimental work to follow up on this and to really get that ecosystem service into the picture. Okay, I'm getting there, don't worry. Okay, wasps as food. Now, this is a comb full of some gorgeously juicy wasps. Are you a bit hungry? These are some larvae. If you are one of the 2 billion people in the world who love to snack on insects, you will be salivating, because these are a delicacy and much, much desired in many parts of the world. This is actually the comb of the murder hornet, the giant Asian hornet, which this is from Japan. I was in Japan last year, and we had the great pleasure of going wasp hunting with the Japanese Wasp Keepers Association. It's basically a collection of retired men. It's very male. And what they've done here is they've tied a bit of ribbon around the waist of the Vespa mandarinia, which is the murder hornet, the big scary one that the Americans are so exercised about, which in this part of the world, they're native. They are important top predators of the ecosystem, and they don't cause any fear. They follow the wasp back to her nest, so they follow the ribbon, they literally run, literally chase them. And you do that a few times, and you have a man here, and then you have a man over here, and then she comes back, and you work your way through. It's a hobby for them. They love it. You find the nest, you dig it up, they put it in these hives, and then they will supplement it with food, but they will allow it to free fly. They take great delight and pride in the same way that a honeybee keeper does here. Look, there's this wasp keeper here in his wasp outfit. Behind him is his vespary. I think he had 12 hives in there. And then we went to a supermarket, and there he is. He found his own larvae and pupae for sale in the supermarket. He sells his produce, and if he doesn't sell his produce, he will take his very best nest, best nest, to the wasp festival, the Hibu, which happens every October in Japan. And the biggest wasp nest wins the prize, much like we might take our biggest marrow to our garden fete or whatever. It's wasp nest in Japan. Incredible. But as it turns out, it's not peculiar. This is not peculiar at all. If you go anywhere in Southeast Asia, or actually Asia, you are likely to find a community who hunts wasps. This is in India, in Nagaland, which is a remote part of the northeast part of India. And I was here earlier on this year. This video here is of Bunny, who is a Naga wasp farmer. Again, this is the Vespa mandarinia, this is the murder hornet. He has tracked it down. And the way he's tracked it down is actually by finding the sap coming out of the oak trees that his community rely on. He finds them feeding at the sap, and then he will chase it back through the forest to her nest. He will then dig up her nest, and he will care for her in a box, feeding her to ensure that she survives until her first workers emerge. And then when her first workers have emerged, He will go to the forest and find the very best spot and dig a big pit, a pit this big. And then he will suspend the nest in there and bury it. And he will keep an eye on it and protect it for several months while she continues to grow her colony, free flying in the forest, being the apex predator that she needs to be to keep those populations of other insects in check. And then at the end of the autumn, he will then go and dig up that nest. He will harvest the larvae, and depending on the community that he's in, he may celebrate with the community and they will have a big feast, or he might take them to market. And if he takes them to market, he will make a lot of money. They can sell a wasp nest for about 400 to 600 pounds. Bearing in mind that a cup of coffee there costs 20 pence. Okay, that's the scale of the economy. We were able to talk to these communities and learn about how they do this because they have enormous traditional ecological knowledge. They know things about these wasps that we don't know, that isn't in the literature, at least not the literature that I can read. And it's only through people like Bunny and also amazing people like local people, this local guide, Tasia Chase, who is our local collaborator out there, who is able to speak the local languages, who's able to build those relationships with the locals, that we're able to access this information and learn more about those insects because those people, the people that live alongside them, that live in such close proximity to them, that aren't scared of them, that see them as a valuable commodity, they've learned about their ecology and their behaviour, and they have things to tell us that we didn't know. As well as taking the nest to the market, one of the greatest honours is to wear a shawl, which is the Vespa shawl, which is the hornet shawl. And this is Tasia wearing the shawl, and it's only worn by men of a particular high prestige in their community. So wasps are revered as a really important and valued cultural commodity in their environments. So Femi Benny is a PhD student who's currently working on this. This is all her idea. She found these communities, she'd worked on them before, and she's just come back from the field where she was interviewing these Indigenous communities and asking them, so we can learn from them, we can learn about their traditional ecological knowledge. And she's found that just in this area of Nagaland, which is the top northeast corner of India, just amongst these two communities, these two tribes, the Chakasang and the Angami, they farm 20 species of social wasps. We think that this is probably the highest density in terms of numbers of species of wasps, possibly in the world, of social wasps in one place, or at least vespines. The farmers are very opportunistic. We went out with the farmers. We did a walk in the woods style interviews with them. They will hunt, they will look for anything. They are curious. They notice nature. They know the species. They have their own local names for them. And a village that can be only 10 kilometers away, 5 kilometers away from another village, they'll have a different name for it. They have very local knowledge. They work as groups, and it's such an important part of their income and their culture. And they also have rules and regulations. They know which species of wasps are aggressive. So they have laws. You're not allowed to keep this wasp in a hive in the village. If you want to keep that wasp, you go to the end of the village and you put your hive there. They have regulations. They also have regulations on sustainable harvesting. So they will harvest the worker larvae, and they will make sure they always leave the sexual larvae such that they're keeping the populations going. They have a really good understanding of ecology, and most of them haven't gone to school. Schooling is not compulsory in this part of India. So it's really fascinating, I have to say, and we're only just beginning to delve into this area. Okay, I'm almost there. Wasps and cultural beliefs. So a similar project that we did with farmers in Cameroon, where we went and asked them what they knew about their pests, and with the idea that we could also find out what they know about wasps. Now, it turns out that they don't know a huge amount about wasps, not in the same way that the Indian farmers do, but they certainly know about their pests. They could give names. They have their local names, depending on which village you go to. They also have local names for the different pests. But that was not surprising because they have a big pest problem with their crops in Cameroon. They need to know what these pests are in order to be able to get the help that they need in order to treat them and make sure they don't go hungry. What was really surprising is that when we showed them pictures of the wasps, different species of wasps that are common around them, they also could tell us what they were. Now, I will challenge any one of you to be able to give a name to the social wasps that we find in the UK, apart from Liam. I would challenge anyone else in this room. I bet you can't. And yet these people, they're not entomologists. Most of them haven't been to school, let alone university, and yet they have names for their wasps. And yet they don't like the wasps, they don't eat the wasps. So we were really perplexed. We're like, how do you know? Why do you care so much about having names for these wasps? And then something happened. Whilst my Cameroonian student was doing the interviews, because he's French speaking, I'm not, I would then go look for wasps in order to collect them so we could sequence those guts. And these people live a very basic life. They live in mostly mud huts. And we'd ask them, do you have any wasp nests? And they'll say, oh, yes, I have 3 nests in my house. Oh, okay. I go to that's me. I'm in their house, and their wasp nests are literally in their living rooms, in their bedrooms, above their beds, above their sofas, above where they're living. There's wasps, and they're these wasps. They're big, and they have nasty stings. Okay, and they will go for you if you disturb them. And yet they have them in their houses. And so he said, yes, I've got 3 nests. You can have those 2, but you leave this one for me. I was like, why do you want a wasp nest in your house? And it turns out that the reason why they want the wasp nest in their house is because they have this cultural beliefs about the wasps. They believe that they are guardians, that they're going to keep them safe from evil spirits and witches. They will sting people who have a bad mind. They will sting people who are trying to invade their house and steal their things. They also say that they protect them against diseases and they can cure them of common ailments. This is why they wanted the wasps in their nests, in their houses. They don't like the wasps, but they tolerate them because they have this belief. And there is some science, there's some potential, there is a scientific basis to why they might have come up with this idea, and I can talk about it later if you've got time. But the idea that they might actually protect them and have some kind of medicinal properties is also really interesting. And there is not much literature on this either, but there is enough to say, I think we can be sure, that the venom of wasps hold components that do have medicinal properties. There is already research on that, mostly to do with immunotherapy, but there is also evidence that some components of venom could be a potential treatment for cancer. We know that wasps like this is a mud dauber wasp, put antibiotics into their nests, that they use that in the clay, and that they have symbionts that help them keep the levels of bacteria and viruses down. And that makes sense for a solitary wasp. Remember that pompiled wasp with her big tarantula that she's going to bury in the ground. She's going to leave it there for a few weeks. So has to be able to defend itself or not become consumed by bacteria such that it's still available for that baby wasp. And then really interestingly, and again from Africa, there's evidence that these mud dauber wasps enrich the clay of their nests with minerals like iron and magnesium and zinc. And they only found this out because anthropologists were wondering why there were holes in the walls of the mud huts. And the people said, well, it's the women. It's like, what do you mean it's the women? Well, the women eat them. The pregnant women eat the wasp nests. It's called geophagy, eating of insect earths. It's not actually that unusual. Termites are a great source of nutrition. People eat termite earths. People eat wasp earths. And it contains the same minerals that if you're pregnant or malnourished, you would go to the chemist here and get supplements. They supplement themselves from wasp nests. I've reached the end, you'll be very glad to hear. But I hope that I've convinced you that we have evidence that wasps are important as regulators, both in natural populations and also they hold much potential as biocontrol agents, that they have much potential as pollinators, and that we should be thinking more of them in terms of their supporting and regulatory services. I hope I've also convinced you that there's already evidence that wasps have cultural values. We must stop having this very westernized kind of Northern Hemisphere British view on what wasps are and why we don't like them. And also provisioning. People across Asia are eating wasps all the time. We're missing a trick here. Entomophagy is the future for sustainable sources of protein. Wasps are on our doorsteps. We kill thousands of nests a year. Why don't we eat them? Sorry, and the pollination. They have so much potential with pollination. I think that's a really exciting area. Any young students in the audience thinking about careers, wasp pollination, I guarantee you, it's an untapped niche out there. But above all these contributions, in whatever way we want to measure them, we have to remember that the only reason they exist is because the endless forms of wasps have evolved and are still evolving, in the words of Darwin. And I like to think he was thinking of wasps when he finished his Origin of Species. The diversity of wasps, that we've only scraped the tip of the iceberg, and there is so much more to learn about them, not just in their social evolution and behaviour, but also in their roles in ecosystems. So if we now come back to Baba's quote, we will only conserve what we love. I hope I've told you that we can. There are people in the world who do love wasps, aside from me. We will only love what we understand. We are growing to learn. The more research we put into wasps, the more we'll understand it. The more that we listen to other people with different perspectives, different lived experiences around the world, the more we will understand wasps. And then finally, we will understand only what we are taught, if only we will listen to the wasps and to the people around us. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you. I'm convinced. Thanks very much. Okay, can we hit the lights, people? We'll get some questions. Actually, I'll kick off with one question. So, does this negative view of wasps, clearly so people are losing out and not appreciating the benefits, does it have negative implications for wasps? Obviously, the social wasps, the yellow jackets are everywhere anyway, but are wasps, certain types of wasps actually suffering from persecution and decline because of these negative views?
So because people go out and kill them,
Yes.
I mean, undoubtedly, there's no data on that. What I was expecting you to ask me is whether we have any evidence that wasps are declining in the same way that other insects are. So I might
Interesting. You could test that one. Yes.
Again, we don't really know, but we know a little bit more than human persecution of wasps. So like all insects, there are winners and losers. And in the wasps, we suffer because we haven't got a lot of good data on what species are where and their abundances. But what we do know is that the vespines, so the yellow jackets and the hornets, well, particularly the yellow jackets, appear to be quite resilient in that they will adapt to live in our urban environments, and their populations appear to not have changed over the last 100 years in the UK. The impact of pest controllers going out and killing wasp nests, removing them from your gardens, undoubtedly it's having some effect, but it's hard to say. It's hard to say whether it's actually having a vast impact on their populations themselves. I mean, I think if we, the idea that wasps could be useful as food is quite an interesting one, because we don't really want everyone to go out and eat their wasps. We only want you to do it sustainably. So if you do want to eat the wasps, leave the sexual combs, please, so you have the next generation. But I mean, in the places where they do eat the wasps, they're doing it very sustainably. So I don't think that's having an appreciable impact.
And also, what about the ecological role of wasps as food? Do a bit of predation by birds or other things? Are they significant?
Food for other organisms? Yes. So we did write a paper on predators of wasps. Let me remember. So the main predator of wasps in the UK are badgers. Right. So it's really annoying. I love badgers, but they do dig up wasp nests. It's very annoying if you've identified a wasp nest and you come back the next day and it's been dug up by a badger. But yeah, birds will also feed on wasps. I mean, they're obviously, they are apex predators, but there are obviously things that will also predate on them. So yeah, they must be also an important part of the energy flow. So they should be in your models.
Okay, I'll open up to the audience.
Excellent talk. Thank you very much. Do you have any idea why, even though they are ecologically important, they have been overlooked by science?
Well, I think scientists are just people. And in the same way that the average member of the public on the street will have a bias against wasps because they're products of culture, scientists are the same. And I think it's really bizarre, though. I think, I've spent my whole career going to the social insect conferences, and undoubtedly every time we go, there's at least 50% of the talks will be on bees, and then maybe 30 or 40% on ants, and then there might be a few wasp talks. It depends if my group go or not. It's bizarre. I think it's the only explanation is that, well, actually, there's probably two explanations. One is that it's the product of culture. And so I blame Aristotle. We don't like wasps. We don't research wasps. Secondly, some of the funding streams that particularly the UK government has put into insect research have specifically focused on pollinators and not on, and maybe they'll be on biocontrol, but wasps, particularly social wasps, we lack the evidence base that's substantial enough to persuade a big funder that actually social wasps is a thing and could be really important as biocontrol. I know this because I've tried, so I'm building up this little base. So I think it will snowball though, right? I mean, I actually think the analogy of how our society in the UK has changed over the last, well, you know, since I was a child. When I was a child, you couldn't walk into a shop and trip over bee merch. You know, you didn't have your mugs with your bees and your scarves with your bees and your bee books and I love bee stickers everywhere. That didn't exist. I mean, I grew up in Wales, so maybe it exists elsewhere, but it wasn't in Wales. And yet, because there's been this interest in what bees as pollinators, and there's been more research put into it, and that's resulted in research outputs that get picked up by the media, which then report it to the public learn more about bees, and it kind of reinforces it then. So my hope is that perfect model of success that has been paved by the bee researchers, the wasps could follow in their wake.
This is a deeply unscientific question. What's your favorite wasp and why?
My favorite wasp is Polistes canadensis, which is the wasp that I studied for a long time in Panama. In fact, you've been to Gamboa, so you will have seen them on the buildings everywhere, big black, well, dark chestnut wasps. The reason it's my favorite is because I just spent many years studying it, because it was big and scary, and I graduated from these cute little, you know, fragrant tickle wasps to the big scary I can sting you and really kill you wasps, and they were also I guess the reason why I really love them is because we sequenced their genome, and that was the first aculeate wasp genome.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great talk. Two things. One is just a suggestion. Why not make a children's book about a social wasp, just to increase its popularity among the smallest generation?
Yeah, I would love to, but yeah, I have a day job. It's not
well, you can inspire somebody else to do it.
There's definitely, I've had a lot of people send me their drafts.
Okay, cool.
Writing a children's book is apparently really hard. Have you written a children's book?
Bits of illustration.
Right.
It's a bit of a meme within people.
Yeah.
Of people who like say, I'm going to write a children's book, and then 2 days later the one thing is the fewer in children's books, the fewer words you have, often the harder it is.
And you have to use the right spectrum of vocabulary. You also have to write, because I did speak to my agent about this, you also have to write the entire book before you get a deal. So you have to have invested in it before you have to have written the whole thing. But there are people out there who write children's books and they can do it brilliantly. Children's books. Yeah.
Cool. And the other thing is the data you had about the interactions or the potential for pollination for different wasps and the association with plants. Was that for the UK? And did that come from no?
Oh, it was all global.
Global, okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought in the UK there's this new about AI helped AMI monitoring with automatic monitoring of insects, where they use cameras on individual flowers.
Yeah.
And at least if it's possible to identify the wasps by these pictures, that would generate a lot of generate a lot of information on which plants they go to.
Well, so there is, well, I don't know whether Leah wants to talk more about this. Oh, go on, Ian.
No, it's not.
I think obviously technology is potentially way forward. I mean, another thing that we really like to do is to, there are other sources of information. So the data that we got for this was purely going through papers, and often they're never papers about wasp pollination. They're papers with a pollination network, and there'll be a few wasps in there. So that's how we got the data. It was very labor intensive. But one idea I think would be really nice is to use AI, machine learning, to extract pictures of wasps from iNaturalist, for example, because if you find a wasp on a flower on iNaturalist, they've invariably got bits of pollen on them as well. So seeing wasps, because people take pictures of insects on flowers because they're still, and a lot of the pictures of wasps on iNaturalist are on flowers. There's probably a huge amount of data there that's not. This is literally just scraping the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, technology is clearly the way forward.
Hi, thank you. This was a fantastic talk. It's just very different to what I've seen before. So thank you for this. I just also kind of very, to some extent, simple question too, actually. The first one, to what extent is there scientific evidence if wasps are more aggressive than bees? And the second question perhaps is more, what can you tell us about the potential, not planned a wasp interaction actually, but perhaps wasp, bees, or other pollinator interactions? Do they quite overlap quite a bit spatially, for instance, and how do they interact?
You mean on a plant, for example, do they outcompete?
Potentially, or
Yeah.
between them as well in the same locations.
Oh, I mean, a wasp will go for a bee because a bee is just food. I think there is some evidence on Vespa velutina, Vespa. Oh, I had a blank, God. Which is the yellow-legged Asian hornet, which is the one that's moved through, invasive species that moved through Europe and comes here. That they are outcompeting. They are likely to exclude other insects from flower patches. I don't know of any other. Liam, do you know any other work?
Specifically will predate bees.
Okay.
So they will go for, and so they will hawk at nest. So these Vespa, lots of the hornets will hawk at a nest. They'll sit at a beehive, and they will wait until the forager comes back, and then they'll jump on them. And that's why, it's partly why the invasive hornet is doing so well and is causing such a stir with the honeybee keepers, because our native European hornet doesn't have that kind of hawking behavior, whereas this Asian yellow-legged Asian hornet does. So it has a different foraging behavior, which our honeybees have not evolved to cope with. Yeah. Your first question was, are wasps more aggressive than bees? I don't think they are. I think the problem is that people come into contact with wasps more than bees, because bees will never come to they might come if you've got some honey or sugar or something, but they rarely come to you. Wasps will come to you because you've got something that they want, food. They're not interested in you. If they appear aggressive, it's probably your fault, it's your behavior. You're aggressive, you're flailing your arms around. It's just simply responding to the cues that it's evolved to respond to, as if you're a predator. I think people normally get stung by wasps if they stumble into a nest. And of course, they will be aggressive because they're defending their colony. But I think it's equally likely to happen if you stumble into a bee nest, whether it's a bumblebee or a honeybee.
Thank you.
Well,
I've got two questions as well, but hopefully they're quick ones. And they're both fair. Anyway, so the first one was, you mentioned at one point when you showed the phylogeny and you said, and this is where wasp wastes evolved. So I was interested just to know what practical significance wasp wastes have. We've seen some really extreme ones. And the other one was, I don't know if I just missed it, but I don't, if wasps are predators, and so I wasn't sure why they're pollinating things.
Sorry, I didn't explain that. Okay, the two are connected. So well done. Connected questions, top of the class. So why wasp waste? Yeah, so the evolution of wasp waste, the theory is that it happened in the parasitoids, which are the ones without stings. So the wasp waste evolved before the sting. And it meant that wasps could fold around their abdomen much more easily and reach and therefore lay their eggs in places that they previously couldn't have reached. So that the sawflies or the wood wasps, which are kind of the base of the phylogeny, they look like wasps, but they're really stumpy, wasted. And they don't need to do any fancy, they just have to lay their egg in the plant. It doesn't in a stem. Whereas once you want to be able to get your egg into a caterpillar, which perhaps is inside a crevice or behind a leaf, the more you can bend your abdomen, the more likely it is that you can lay an egg. And so the theory is that by having this wasp waste, it meant that they could exploit a wider diversity of niches and then speciate. The second question about the nectar, so sorry. The adult wasps, whether they're solitary or social or parasitoid adults, they don't actually feed on prey at all. And that's partly because of the wasp waste, that they can't digest it. Their guts won't allow them to. And so they are vegetarians. The adults are vegetarians. It's the larvae, the juveniles, which are the carnivores. And so the prey is for the larvae, and then the adults need to get nutrition from flowers. But they also, in the case of the social wasps, they will get it from the larvae. In fact, the larvae in a social nest are often regarded as a social stomach. So the workers bringing in the prey, feed it to the larvae digest it, and then they'll regurgitate this sort of fluid ball that the wasps will then take through trophallaxis.
Okay. Oh, thank you. That's fascinating.
Really moving back to when you're under. Great. There's one online from which says, what's the potential for wasp biocontrol in the UK, particularly addressing sugar beets, aphids, and neonics?
Yeah, great. I think that's a really good question. I have a PhD student working on this now. I think it's a lot of potentially. Although the reason why I focus on addressing this question not in the UK is because the only wasps we have social wasps we have in the UK are the vespines, and they're much harder to work with. They have big colonies, there's thousands of individuals, they sting you, they're hard to find as well, to be honest, to find a nest. Whereas the wasps that you find in other parts of the world that build these smaller nests, you can see them on buildings, you just get a Ziploc bag, pair of marigolds, Ziploc bag, done it. You've got the nest, you can move it, so you can move them around, so you can relocate them really easily. So a wasp nest in the UK, if you happen to have them on your farm, then that's great, but the odds are quite low. So you want to be able to relocate them. Much like people do with honeybees, they move in the US, they'll move them from across the country to pollinate different crops at different times of year. We want to be able to move wasp nests around, and that's much harder. I think the other problem with the UK, and actually the student I've working on this is much more of a sociology student, because again, farmers will not want wasps on their farms. So again, it's providing the evidence that these wasps can be useful and effective, such that the farmers are prepared to give it a go. But also, as I said in my talk, it's unlikely that using these natural enemies that they will get rid of all the pests. It means that they will regulate the populations, but from what we understand about wasp foraging behaviour, once those populations of pests are quite low, they'll probably switch to something else. And maybe they'll switch to some caterpillars in the forest nearby, and then they'll ignore the pests. And then there's a lovely experiment that tried to look at biocontrol by wasps in the 1980s in the field. And they had this fantastic experiment that they set up, and they got the wasps ready, and they were growing the cabbages, and they're getting ready with their pests to chuck them on the cabbages. But whilst they were getting all this ready, the field next door, there was some other crop, and the wasps had found pests in that field. And so their experiment was on the cabbages here, and the wasps were here, and they wouldn't feed on the cabbages, they'd go to the next field over. So that's where this idea of fixation comes from, that these particular wasps can fixate on particular prey. Now, of course, maybe that can be a tool that we can use them to fixate on particular pests in a field, but that's all research to be done.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll wrap up there, but thank you very much, Seirian. That was absolutely fascinating and education to all of us. And do stick around for a drink and buy a book around the corner if you want as well. So, thank you.
Thanks.